speaking of complete overhauls next season and sticking with the NBA playoffs, there was a second Game 7 game that took place last night. The Atlanta Hawks and the Philadelphia 76ers. The Atlanta Hawks beat the 76ers in Game 7 at the Wells Fargo Center, 103 to 96. Let me first give credit to the Atlanta Hawks. This was a major road performance. They have been the road warriors this postseason. I believe that in 6 postseason games this year, they have won 4 of the 6. 4 of the 6 road games this postseason are the Atlanta Hawks. They were absolutely sensational down the stretch, closing out this game. Kevin Huerter with a season-high 27 points, hit the 3 clutch free throws down the stretch after he got fouled by Matisse Thybulle. That was a huge play for a guy who I loved coming out of Maryland. I thought he'd be the prototypical kind of 3-and-D guy, or at least a guy that can stretch the floor. He's about 6'8", shoots the lights out. That was a big-time performance. Gallinari chipped in 17 points off the bench, and even though Trae Young struggled 5 of 23, still scored 21 points and dished out 10 assists. This guy has proven to be a tremendous leader, to be the ultimate galvanizer for an Atlanta Hawks team that with him, he has scored at least 20 points in every single postseason game this year. The guy's averaging 28 points and 10 assists for the postseason is Trae Young. His assist-to-turnover ratio is stellar, like 120 to 40, about a 3-to-1. And him being hounded with the basketball all the time, it is absolutely sensational what he's been doing. And I just can't say enough about the job that Nate McMillan has done with this Atlanta Hawks team, taking over for Lloyd Pierce, who was fired back on March 1st. Hawks had a 14-20 record. They were the 11th seed in the Eastern Conference. And he has turned this organization around. The players have bought into him. They love him. And I always said from the get-go, even before Nate McMillan took over, even with Lloyd Pierce, that I was a big believer in the Atlanta Hawks. I thought they'd be my dark horse team to go far in the playoffs. And I said when they were facing off against the 76ers, this is a dangerous team. And when the 76ers lost Game 1 at home, I knew they were in trouble. I knew this was going to be a 7-game series. I will admit, I thought the 76ers would win. But at no point did I feel comfortable in the 76ers' chances, especially with Joel Embiid hampered with that injury. This is a legitimate Hawks team that is deep, that plays confidently, that plays freely, that has a swagger to them about it. They talk trash, but they back it up. They're physical. They get in your face, and they don't shy away from the biggest moments. And on the road, ultimately, they were the ones down the stretch making all the plays. And so I first wanted to extend my appreciation and offer some praise to the Atlanta Hawks, because this was a team that no one expected to reach this position. Some pundits had them losing to the Knicks in the first round. I didn't see that happening, but no one necessarily predicted that they would have reached the Eastern Conference playoffs. So, not to mention their trolling was fantastic at the end of the game. John Collins wore a shirt with him dunking over Joel Embiid. The ultimate troll. The Atlanta Hawks social media team was fantastic. And I wanted to take this opportunity to extend my congratulations to the Atlanta Hawks. That's what I wanted today to be about. But unfortunately, that wasn't the lasting impression for me. That wasn't what I was left standing with. That wasn't my biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway was this result was the culmination of one of the most embarrassing series losses by the Philadelphia 76ers. That was an absolutely embarrassing series loss by the Philadelphia 76ers. It's one thing to lose in Game 7 and to lose a 7-game series where every single game is teetering, going back and forth, leads are vacillating, and there are many lead changes and it's nip and tuck through the end. This was a 76ers team that was up 2-1. They had a 26-point lead at home in Game 5 that they blew. They had an 18-point lead on the road in Game 4 that they blew. And find themselves in position of having to try and close out this team at home in Game 7. And to me, not only do you lose three of four home games in this playoffs, in this series against the Atlanta Hawks. They lost 3 of 4 at home at the Wells Fargo Center. What did we talk about leading up to the playoffs? How important the 1 and the 2 seeds were. Because for months, everyone was talking about, well, which team is going to be able to avoid the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round? Is it going to be the 76ers or the Nets? Which team's going to receive the number 1 seed and get a chance to face the Knicks or the Hawks in the second round and get to avoid the Milwaukee Bucks? That was the storyline coming into this playoffs. Over and over again, we were discussing that, and the irony is the two teams that were both jockeying for the number 1 seed to avoid the Milwaukee Bucks ended up losing. And the Atlanta Hawks come out of nowhere, catch the 76ers off guard, expose their biggest flaws and deficiencies, and they shock them. And so I don't want to absolutely crush every single player on the 76ers because I thought that Seth Curry was fantastic. He was the second most consistent player, the second best player for the 76ers this series. I didn't think there's any blame that should be directed in his way. And to be quite honest, I think that Joel Embiid was fantastic as well. The guy is laboring through a torn MCL, torn meniscus in his knee, for crying out loud. The guy's 7'1", 280 pounds, and he was averaging this postseason 28 points, 10.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, over 50% from the floor, 39% from three, 85% from the free throw line, to go along with 1.5 blocks. And against the Hawks, those numbers ticked up. 30 points per game, 13 rebounds, 4 assists. The percentages were a little bit down, but the production was still there. And so I know that people are wanting to crush Joel Embiid and tear him a new one for the late turnover in Game 7, for the 2 missed free throws in Game 5, for shooting a bunch of threes last night. Even though he shot 40%, he made 2 of 5, and wanting him to get his behind on the block and play bully ball. And those are all valid. I understand that. And he could have elevated his game even more, but he wasn't the biggest liability for the 76ers. If it was not for his performances, I mean, the guy, again, averaged 30 points per game in this series. If it wasn't for him producing night in and night out, the 76ers may have lost this series in 5 games. So I don't want to absolutely throw Joel Embiid under the bus, not to absolve him of all the blame. There's no question that in some timely spots, he needed to step up and make some plays. But he was not the biggest impediment to this team's success. He was an absolute leader. He set the tone, battling through injuries, not making excuses. And if there was ever a player that had an opportunity and had a legitimate and valid excuse to not be playing well, it was Embiid. Playing through a torn meniscus. The biggest disappointment was Ben Simmons. Ben, 4 points in Game 7. You don't even attempt a wide open dunk when you spin off the defender off Gallinari right in the middle of the paint. No one's around you. You give up an open dunk to try and dish it to Matisse Thybulle, who's fouled. Not even Joel Embiid. He didn't even know how to sum it up or how to react to it in the postgame conference. They asked him, what do you think was the turning point of the game? He said, I don't really know how to answer that, other than there was a moment when we had an open shot and we gave it up and we only scored 1 free throw. Clearly alluding to that unattempted dunk by Ben Simmons. This series, Ben Simmons is averaging 10 points, 6 rebounds, and 9 assists. He shot fewer than 6 shot attempts in 4 games. He scored under 10 points in 4 of the 7 games this postseason. And he didn't attempt a shot in the fourth quarter in 5 of those 7 games. This is Ben Simmons. This is your 3-time All-Star. This is a guy that you're paying 5 years, $177 million to. Ben Simmons. And I'm just watching this game and thinking to myself, here you have a guy who's supposed to be the second best player on the team. And for the series, he's shooting 15 of 44 from the free throw line, 33%, shot 34% this postseason. That was the worst percentage from the free throw line in NBA history with at least 70 attempts by Ben Simmons. And I just think about, okay, yes, he did dish out 13 assists. He did defend well, limiting Trae Young to 5 of 23 shooting, but the 76ers aren't paying you that much money to be passive in a game 7 to pass up open dunks. They're not paying you that much money just to defend and shoot 34% from the free throw line. They're paying you to produce 20-point triple-doubles like he's capable of doing. And I still believe that in a different environment with his own team, Ben Simmons can still flourish and thrive. But this experiment is over. This experiment is over. We've seen enough between him and Joel Embiid, and it doesn't work. It just simply does not work. And he's got to be traded. I think that's the only option. Later in this week, I'll start to preview some potential trade destinations for him that they can look into. But this experiment is over. And then Doc Rivers. I love Doc Rivers. I absolutely adore Doc Rivers. I think he's one of the best coaches in the NBA. He doesn't look good this morning either, because some message that he's trying to reinforce in the huddles in the fourth quarter just isn't syncing with his teams. It's just simply not syncing with his players. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is, but we know his track record in the postseason with blowing big leads. We saw it with the Clippers last year. We saw it again this year, up 2-1. Now, last year I defended him because I thought that he shouldn't have taken the brunt of the criticism, that I think the players had to be held more accountable for their shortfalls. And this year, while I do believe that the players deserve to be held accountable, there is something to be said for being able to inspire and evoke the best out of your players and elicit the best types of responses and performances out of your players. And for whatever reason, he wasn't able to summon that from every single player. Seth Curry, yeah, he did. But I just was left standing there thinking, how, if you're this compilation of players, this roster so much better than the Atlanta Hawks from top to bottom, they've got the better star player. They've got the deeper team at the moment. We thought they had the better coach. You've got home court advantage and you lose 3 out of 4 games at home. He's got to be able to make more adjustments is the bottom line. And then to make things worse, to add insult to injury, you look over in the other conference and your former assistant Ty Lue is taking the Clippers, who you were just the coach of last year, to the Western Conference without Kawhi Leonard. So just embarrassing if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, and they've got to look in the mirror really hard this summer, this postseason, and this offseason, rather. They got to sit down Ben Simmons, get him to shoot, and then trade him. Get him to shoot and then trade him to try and raise back up his equity. Embarrassing. Just a shame. Just an absolute shame that they lost. But big shout out to the Atlanta Hawks. Again, they were fantastic down the stretch.